Viewer discretion is advised.
Oakland Coliseum, Oakland, California. Probably the most maligned NFL stadium of all time, besides FedEx Field. The Oakland Coliseum is somehow not the worst on this list. That's because when it opened, it was actually state-of-the-art and ahead of its time. However, the baseball and football merger in this place was always awkward. The huge foul ground for the baseball field didn't really help the impersonal vibe of the football field. Once Mount Davis was added in 2006, what little charm was left, the view of the mountains was gone. And despite half the stadium being upgraded, in air quotes of course, it still sucked for football. On top of that, the stadium began to fall into gross disrepair both inside, outside, underneath, above, you name it. After failed proposal after proposal, the Raiders finally had enough and left for new digs in Las Vegas. And it's only a matter of time before this place meets its completely abandoned fate when the A's move. Number 27, Raider Rusher. I'm not actually sure what Raider Rusher is, but I'm positive he's not allowed around any schools. Damn it, it's too late. There was also this smaller version of him, which looks like he was left in the dryer too long, and wow, suddenly it feels like I got some bad shrooms, and I can visibly see protozoa underneath my skin. This thing is creepy as fuck.
The 1970s Raiders. Whereas the Cowboys were the Steelers' biggest threat in the NFC, the 70s Raiders were their biggest rival in their own conference. In an 8-year span from 1970 to 1977, the Raiders won a Super Bowl, but lost 5 conference championship games. The Raiders went 2-3 against Pittsburgh in the playoffs during the decade, and despite many deep playoff runs and classic moments, it's tough to argue that they underachieved with just a single Super Bowl appearance. Las Vegas. I'm amazed Raiders fans are as passionate as they are because your franchise has shown multiple times that they don't give a fuck about you. They moved from Oakland to LA, back to Oakland, and now to Las Vegas. Over the last 35 years, the Raiders have largely been a joke outside of 3 years in the early 2000s. In fact, one could argue the biggest moment in your team's history was the Tuck Rule, which helped launch the career of human cancer Tom Brady. Then, of course, there was the Super Bowl in 2002 where you got bent over by your former head coach. You have just one playoff appearance since 2003, a game in which you lost to Brock Osweiler. You were stuck in QB purgatory with Derek Carr, a guy who craps his pants in spectacular fashion whenever it seems like he's just on the cusp of finally breaking out. Your defense sucks, largely thanks to terrible drafting. John Gruden is still living off of his Super Bowl ring that he won with Tony Dungy's team against you, and he still has plenty of years left on his contract. Al Davis was an egotistical piece of shit. Ken Stabler doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. And if you're a grown-ass man who wears Raiders makeup to games, reevaluate your life. You won't be winning anything in the next 15 years from the homes in your division anyway. Raider Rusher. Raiders. What the hell is this? Why does he have no torso? Why are there little horns coming out of the top of his helmet? This is by far the worst thing anybody associated with the Raiders has done in the year 2021. He looks like the weird kid in school that you act nice to just in case he happens to snap one day. Rating? 0 out of 10. Las Vegas Raiders, Ken Stabler. Much like fellow good old boy Bobby Lane, Stabler played hard and partied hardier. But he was also the best quarterback the Raiders have ever had. He's in the Hall of Fame. He made 4 Pro Bowls, won the 1974 MVP, and a Super Bowl ring in 1976. He won 72% of his starts with the franchise and also made 5 AFC Championship games. Unfortunately for Stabler, he had a lot of playoff heartbreaks, including the Immaculate Reception and 4 AFC Championship game losses, including 2 to his hated rival Pittsburgh. Stabler's stats took a hit after he left the Raiders, but his stats with the Raiders still hold up pretty well today, especially his playoff stats. Going to slam back a few beers tonight in his honor. Las Vegas Raiders, Andrew Walter. Yes, that's right. The Raiders have employed a quarterback worse than Jamarcus Russell, which is obviously no small feat. No offense to Rex Ryan. That quarterback's name is Andrew Walter, who finished his terrible NFL career with 3 touchdowns and 16 interceptions for a comically bad 52.6 passer rating. He also went 2-7 as a starter, and even that surprises me. How the fuck did 2 NFL teams lose to this guy? They should be arrested immediately. Las Vegas Raiders, 1985 divisional round. The 1985 Raiders went 12-4 and had NFL MVP Marcus Allen at his peak. They were a supposed lock to at least make the AFC Championship game, but the underdog Pats had different ideas. LA was favored by 5.5 points, but New England shocked the world with a 27-20 win, in large part thanks to controlling the time of possession with a deadly ground game and LA committing 6 turnovers, including a fumble recovered in the end zone by the Patriots for a touchdown that ended up being the deciding point. Las Vegas Raiders, Jonathan Abram. Abram was one of the Raiders' 3 first-round picks in 2019, and thus far he has not lived up to the billing. He hits hard, but he's been injury-prone and a complete reliability in pass coverage, which is kind of a big deal for a defensive back. This upcoming year is definitely a make or break year for Las Vegas Raiders Jim Plunkett, the Eli Manning of his era, a former first overall pick who won 2 rings despite being largely average. Plunkett finished his Raiders career with more interceptions than touchdowns, but he will forever live on as a Raiders legend due to him piloting the team to 2 rings in the early 80s. This does not mean he was a good quarterback though. He was decidedly average outside of 2 playoff runs. I've heard people say he should make the Hall of Fame, which is a joke.
All know the story. Josh McDaniels started his NFL career 6-0 and looked to be the next big coaching sensation. Maybe the next Bill Belichick. Since then, his record as head coach is 7-23, and at the time of this video, his Raiders have started out 2-7, losing games in frustrating and inept ways. Before this year, we made a video outlining how he arrived as the head coach in Vegas, how he ghosted the Colts, and how everyone thought McDaniels was a snake. Now, we have to look at why McDaniels still has a job, analyze his many mistakes as a coach, and what the Raiders can even do about it. This is the ultimate case of buyer's remorse. Part 1, starting with the aftermath. The 2021 Raiders were an unmitigated disaster off the field. John Gruden resigned over emails. Henry Ruggs committed vehicular homicide. Damon Arnett went insane. Nate Hobbs got a DUI. And still somehow, led by interim coach Rich Bisaccia, the Raiders made it to the playoffs. Bisaccia, a longtime special teams coordinator, rallied the Raiders to inspiring wins and brought stability to an otherwise chaotic year. However, that was not enough to keep his job. Enter Josh McDaniels, who was signed to a 4-year deal for an undisclosed amount of money. Given that McDaniels was lured away from the Pats when he was making $4 million a year as an OC, it's probably an absurd amount of cash. The Raiders were a team coming off a playoff berth, had a solid roster led by a veteran QB, and were poised to make a run. To them, giving McDaniels a lot of money made sense. But let's see how poor of a return the Raiders got for their investment. Part 2, the disaster unfolding. Coming out of the gate, things were looking up for the Raiders. They traded for all-pro wideout Davante Adams. They signed defensive end Chandler Jones. They extended tight end Darren Waller. Mason Crosby was healthy. They were set up for success. Then the season happened. In week 1, they lost to the Chargers after trailing in the 4th quarter by just a TD. They had a chance to win it, but a late turnover killed it. In week 2, the Raiders sprinted out to a first half 20-0 lead over the Cardinals and led 23-7 in the 4th quarter. Once again, their defense let them down as the Cards tied it in regulation, then the Raiders lost it in OT on a Hunter Renfrow fumble and return. Game over, and a bad omen for things to come. The Raiders were dropped to 0-3 at the hands of the Titans, and once again, the Raiders had a chance to tie it late, but failed to execute. Josh McDaniels would get his first Raiders win over an arguably worse off team, the Broncos, to climb to 1-3. And then the injuries started mounting up. Hunter Renfrow was already out. Brandon Parker, DJ Turner, Jordan Jenkins, Anthony Averett, and Micah Kiser, and others got the
unit lost.
The linebacker core was so decimated, they signed Blake Martinez off the scrap heap. Now, these are things that McDaniels cannot control, but when you look at what they dealt with last year, and with Carr, Waller, and Adams being healthy, you figure they could still move the ball, which they did in week 5 against the Chiefs, battling hard against their division rival, and again jutting out to a 17-0, then 20-7 lead, with McDaniels pulling some of the right levers, like on this 4th and 1. However, that lead would get erased in a matter of minutes. Bizarre things started to happen. The Chiefs missed a field goal with 9:25 left in the game, but somehow the Raiders held during the play, giving the ball back to the Chiefs, who would score a TD to put them up 30-23. The Raiders would answer back, and though there was questionable reffing throughout this entire game, this next call would fall squarely on McDaniels' shoulders. With 4:27 left in the game following a TD, the Raiders chose to go for 2, and they didn't get it. They would end up losing by a point. The Raiders would beat Houston, a dead-ass shitty team, handily the next week, but their game against the Saints would be an outright embarrassment. A 24-point shellacking to the Saints, who were 2-5 at the time, and a beating so thorough it might get this video age restricted. The Raiders did not cross midfield in the game until their final drive, where Jarrett Stidham had come in for Derek Carr because his ass was getting pounded all game like Riley Reef.
Riley Reef, the last one right here.
The Raiders were outplayed, outmanned, and outcoached by a team that was 3 games under 500, and somehow, this was not their most humiliating loss. The following week, the Raiders once again jumped out to a 17-point lead, this time on the Jags, another sub-500 team, only to blow that and lose by 7. And that brings us to week 9, a loss so sad and pathetic it might literally cause Derek Carr to spend the remainder of his days roaming the streets looking for vigilante justice in a funny-looking suit instead of playing football. Prior to their matchup, the Indianapolis Colts began smoking high-grade crack and literally hired Jeff Saturday out of the announcer's booth, and he promptly tapped a low-level assistant to call his plays. A week before, Saturday had tweeted this and became the only dude ever to rise up off his couch and go out and back up his Twitter smack talk in the history of man. After reinserting Matt Ryan into the lineup, Saturday's Colts beat Sunday's Raiders 25-20. And again, a peculiar choice by McDaniels to go for 2 in the fourth quarter left a lot of people scratching their heads, and a lot of Twitter users dunking on the Raiders. Derek Carr was so emotional after the loss, he cried over the physical demands his teammates and he are going through to be such a bad football team. You can tell losing is tearing up his insides like Indian curry on an empty stomach. McDaniels afterwards said his post-game presser sounded like a broken record. He was honest about his future, saying he's going to go to work and that they all have jobs that they have to do. The question is, for how long? Part 3. What do the Raiders do? We can give Josh McDaniels an out for his team injuries. His DBs are injured to shit, and now Hunter Renfrow is out too. Blake Martinez had enough of this Raider team, so much so he quit before they even played the Colts. Injuries or not, let's look at some stats that may give insight as to if McDaniels is the problem or not. The Raiders rank in the bottom third in nearly every offensive category except passing offense, where they are ranked 12th. They have ran the 30 fewest plays, but are 19th in time of possession. It's alarming that McDaniels, deemed an offensive guru in New England, doesn't necessarily have an explosive offense, even with Davante Adams. On defense, they are expectedly bad, ranking dead last in sacks with only 10, allowing an opposing QBR of 107, also dead last. They are 28th in the league in yards allowed per game at 376, and are letting opponents convert third downs 48.7% of the time, 30th in the league. Okay, so maybe McDaniels can use Patrick Graham as an scapegoat. I said that wrong on purpose. However, there is one stat that's pretty indicative of bad coaching: penalties per game. Penalties mean a lack of discipline, and the Raiders give up 6.7 of them a game, 26th in the NFL. However, that's actually down from last year. Now, the stat that is indicative that McDaniels sucks is his 0-6 record in one-score games. Rich Bisaccia was 5-2 in such games last year without Davante Adams. You can see how much coaching makes a difference. Look at Kevin O'Connell, Robert Salah, Brian Dable, and Nick Sirianni. Pulling the right levers when it matters is a coach's most important job. Excuses or not, the results aren't there for McDaniels, and his entire career record reflects that. So what are the Raiders to do, knowing they hired a lemon? Bring him back, of course. According to reports, the Raiders are so cash poor after the Gruden fiasco and the move to Las Vegas that even if they wanted to fire McDaniels, which is painfully obvious they should, they can't. Mark Davis has already announced no matter what, McDaniels is coming back next year, and that Josh is doing a great job. Guess what? It's about to get worse. There could already be serious roster turnover. You know, like with Derek Carr. Hell, they already cut former first-round pick Jonathan Abram, as the Raiders might look to clean house and start fresh and actually start drafting well. Whether McDaniels is there when and if the team starts winning again, who knows? But it's pretty clear right now the team can't afford to have him keep coaching for them, but also can't afford to fire him. Roll those tanks, baby.
During the 2011 NFL season, tragedy has struck the Oakland Raiders. Their owner, Al Davis, the man that built this team and led them to 3 Super Bowl wins, has died. His son, Mark Davis, has inherited this storied franchise. The Raiders finished the 2011 season at 8-8. A new era of Raiders football has begun.
This is going to be your first full year under Mark Davis. Carson Palmer is also beginning his first full season on the Raiders. Despite him, however, you are pretty terrible as you don't really have much talent on your team. You finish at a disappointing 4-12. Oh well, dynasties take time to build. I'm sure it'll get there in no time.
Carson Palmer was traded to Arizona after 2 disappointing seasons. He also brought in Charles Woodson. Terrell Pryor started at the beginning of the season at quarterback, but he fell off, so you started Matt McGloin for the rest of the season. He also sucked, and you finished 4-12. Charles Woodson really helped you this year, especially when you allowed Nick Foles to throw 7 touchdowns against you in Week 9. Things are not off to a great start in the Mark Davis era.
You have the 5th pick in the draft and you select linebacker Khalil Mack. You take another interesting prospect in Derek Carr in the 2nd round, who will hopefully get rid of your quarterback woes. The building blocks for an exciting team have been placed. This was a historic season in which you achieved very impressive accomplishments, such as being the earliest team eliminated from playoff contention since 2004, and continuing an amazing streak you started last season of losing 16 games in a row. You finished at 3-13.
This year was an incredible step in the right direction. You got Jack Del Rio as your new coach, drafted Amari Cooper in the 1st round, had a ton of Pro Bowlers and some AP All-Pros. Despite all that, you only went 7-9, but this is still an improvement. Next year is your year.
This season was bittersweet, but let's talk about the good part first. You guys were great. You went 12-4 with 7 Pro Bowlers, 3 All-Pros, and Khalil Mack won Defensive Player of the Year. You also ended a 14-year playoff drought. Despite losing a very close game to the Texans in which you had to start your 3rd-string quarterback, Connor Cook, I'd say that every Oakland Raider fan is proud of their hero, Mark Davis. Or they would be if he wasn't constantly trying to move the team to Las Vegas.
How did you decline so much? Your offense was shit and your defense was even worse. During the season, the front office just said fuck it and brought Marshawn Lynch out of retirement just to try to get people to come to games. You finished this season a very disappointing 6-10. And good news, Oakland, the NFL has officially approved the Raiders' move to Las Vegas. Mark Davis is now the most wanted man in Oakland.
At this point, you'd think that Mark Davis couldn't be any more hated in Oakland. You'd be wrong. Before the season even started, Khalil Mack was traded to the Bears as a result of a contract holdout. This was also the first year under former Raiders coach John Gruden, and it didn't go so well as you went 4-12. Back to the cellar.
This is officially the last season in Oakland for the Raiders. The Raiders made some big moves in the offseason and draft. They traded Amari Cooper for draft picks and drafted great players such as Josh Jacobs, Max Crosby, and Hunter Renfrow. They also made a trade with the Steelers to acquire Antonio Brown. However, he never played a snap for Oakland due to him being a cancerous piece of shit during training camp. So the Raiders cut him. They started out the season 6-4 and are contenders to beat out the Chiefs as AFC West champions. You let Oakland down one more time and are 7-8 going into Week 17. However, if you beat the Broncos, you'll make the playoffs. You just gotta get this 2-point conversion.
Carr, batted down! Shelby Harris! You blew it!
This may have been the worst time to relocate a franchise as you did it right in the middle of a pandemic. Obviously, this wasn't under your control, but it is really unlucky timing. This means that your new $2 billion stadium will be without fans in its inaugural season. Your draft class is legendary in all the wrong ways, with prestigious selections such as Henry Ruggs, who wowed scouts with his speediness at the combine, and Damon Arnett, who was looking to start his career off with a bang. The season was not an impressive one, however, as he finished at 8-8.
Finally, Allegiant Stadium is open and Mark Davis can show off his incredible Death Star that he built in Vegas. It is a magnificent stadium, and it's really nice for all the opposing fans that come visit it. This season, so much shit happened. After a 3-2 start in the NFL world with slamming Urban Meyer for his antics in Ohio, it was revealed that John Gruden is a racist and a homophobe. This all came out after Carl Nassib came out as gay the previous offseason. Gruden resigned as head coach and was replaced by Rich Bisaccia. I wonder how the players from the 2020 draft are doing. Damon Arnett was cut for being a fucking idiot. And what about Henry Ruggs, the super fast first round pick? You know the saying speed kills? Ruggs was intoxicated and spent 156 miles per hour in Las Vegas, which resulted in a car crash that killed a 23-year-old woman. He will spend 3 to 10 years in prison, and it should be more. Fuck Henry Ruggs. Somehow, despite all of the bullshit and with help from the Chargers in Week 18, the Raiders finished 10-7 and made the playoffs as the 5th seed. You're playing a 10-7 Cincinnati Bengals trying to end their 31-year curse. This will definitely be a playoff game to remember forever.
5 in the pattern, Burrow. Tries to keep it alive, scrambles. Throws it back in the end zone, but was he out of bounds first or is it a touchdown?
Of course, ref ball ruins everything. There is no reason for the whistle to be blown early. This play screws both teams depending on the ruling, and they decide to give the Bengals the touchdown. Hooray for ref ball. However, the game ended with Carr throwing a pass to a double-covered receiver on 4th and goal, which was intercepted. The Bengals' curse ended, but more importantly, ref ball dominates the NFL and still ruins great football games. Still a good season for the Raiders considering all the bullshit. However, Mark Davis decides that they are not going to go with Rich Bisaccia next season. So what happens next?
In the offseason, you acquire Rock Ya-Sin and one of, if not the best, wide receiver in the league, Devontae Adams, who is reuniting with his former college quarterback Derek Carr. You also get a new coach in Josh McDaniels. Despite things looking up for the Las Vegas Raiders and a bit of hype around the team, you yet again defy expectations and go 6-11. It is only the Raider way.
The Raiders have decided to still go with Josh McDaniels as head coach again, and now everyone is just wondering when he will be fired. Crazy that the coach that ran the Broncos to the ground is doing the same to the Raiders. Derek Carr is finally free from the cell as he was cut. He signed Jimmy Garoppolo as his replacement. Mark Davis has fucked up this team. The team sucks, he moved them to Vegas, and they don't even care about the Raiders. He needs to sell this team. He has ruined them.